International Short Stories, Volume 2. English Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tig Hines. International Short Stories, Volume 2. English Stories. Edited by William Patton. Section 1. The Two Drovers by Sir Walter Scott. Part 1. It was the day after Dawn Fair when my story commences. It had been a brisk market, several dealers had attended from the northern and midland counties in England, and English money had flown so merrily about as to gladden the hearts of the Highland farmers. Many large droves were about to set off for England, under the protection of their owners or of the topsmen whom they employed in the tedious, laborious and responsible office of driving the cattle for many hundred miles from the markets where they had been purchased to the fields or farmyards where they were to be fattened for the shambles. The Highlanders in particular are masters of this difficult trade of driving, which seems to suit them as well as the trade of war. It affords exercise for all their habits of patient endurance and active exertion. They are required to know perfectly the drove roads which lie over the wildest tracts of the country, and to avoid as much as possible the highways which distress the feet of the bullocks, and the turnpikes which annoy the spirit of the drover. Whereas on the broad green or grey track which leads across the pathless moor, the herd not only move at ease and without taxation, but, if they mind their business, may pick up a mouthful of food by the way. At night the drovers usually sleep along with their cattle, let the weather be what it will, and many of these hardy men do not once rest under a roof during a journey on foot from Lochaber to Lincolnshire. They are paid very highly, for the trust reposed is of the last importance, as it depends on their prudence, vigilance and honesty whether the cattle reach the final market in good order and afford a profit to the grazier. But, as they maintain themselves at their own expense, they are especially economical in that particular. At the period we speak of, a Highland drover was victualled for his long and toilsome journey with a few handfuls of oatmeal and 2 or 3 onions, renewed from time to time, and a ram's horn filled with whisky, which he used regularly but sparingly every night and morning. His dirk, or skene dhu, that is, black knife, so worn as to be concealed beneath the arm or by the folds of the plaid, was his only weapon, excepting the cudgel with which he directed the movements of the cattle. A Highlander was never so happy as on these occasions. There was a variety in the whole journey which exercised the Celt's natural curiosity and love of motion. There were the constant change of place and scene, the petty adventures incidental to the traffic, and the intercourse with the various farmers, graziers and traders, intermingled with occasional merrymakings, not the less acceptable to Donald that they were void of expense. And there was the consciousness of superior skill, for the Highlander, a child amongst flocks, is a prince amongst herds, and his natural habits induce him to disdain the shepherd's slothful life, so that he feels himself nowhere more at home than when following a gallant drove of his country castle in the character of their guardian. Of the number who left Doon in the morning, and with the purpose we have described, not a gloonomy of them all cocked his bonnet more briskly, or gartered his tartan hose under knee over a pair of more promising spigs, that is legs, than did Robin Oig McCombich, called familiarly Robin Oig, that is, young, or the lesser Robin. Though small of stature, as the epithet Oig implies, and not very strongly limbed, he was as light and alert as one of the deer of his mountains. He had an elasticity of step which, in the course of a long march, made many a stout fellow envy him, and the manner in which he busked his plaid and adjusted his bonnet argued a consciousness that so smart a John Highlandman as himself would not pass unnoticed among the lowland lasses. The ruddy cheek, red lips and white teeth set off a countenance which had gained by exposure to the weather a healthful and hardy rather than a rugged hue. If Robin Oig did not laugh, or even smile frequently, as indeed is not the practice among his countrymen, his bright eyes usually gleamed from under his bonnet with an expression of cheerfulness ready to be turned into mirth. The departure of Robin Oig was an incident in the little town in and near which he had many friends, male and female. He was a topping person in his way, transacted considerable business on his own behalf, and was entrusted by the best farmers in the Highlands in preference to any other drover in that district. He might have increased his business to any extent had he condescended to manage it by deputy, but except a lad or two, sisters' sons of his own, Robin rejected the idea of assistance, conscious perhaps how much his reputation depended upon his attending in person to the practical discharge of his duty in every instance. He remained therefore contented with the highest premium given to persons of his description, and comforted himself with the hopes that a few journeys to England might enable him to conduct business on his own account in a manner becoming his birth. For Robin Oig's father, Lachlan MacCombich, or son of my friend, his actual clan surname being MacGregor, had been so called by the celebrated Rob Roy because of the particular friendship which had subsisted between the grandsire of Robin and that renowned cateran. Some people even say that Robin Oig derived his Christian name from one as renowned in the wilds of Loch Lomond as ever was his namesake Robin Hood in the precincts of merry Sherwood. Of such ancestry, as James Boswell says, who would not be proud? Robin Oig was proud accordingly, but his frequent visits to England and to the Lowlands had given him tact enough to know that pretensions which still gave him a little right to distinction in his own lonely glen might be both obnoxious and ridiculous if preferred elsewhere. The pride of birth, therefore, was like the miser's treasure, the secret subject of his contemplation, but never exhibited to strangers as a subject of boasting. Many were the words of gratulation and good luck which were bestowed on Robin Oig. The judges commended his drove, especially Robin's own property, which were the best of them. Some thrust out their snuff-mulls for the parting pinch, others tendered the juckandarach, or parting cup. All cried, "Good luck travel out with you and come home with you. Give you luck in the Saxon market, brave notes in the Lower Dew, or black pocket book, and plenty of English fold in the sporran, that is, pouch of goatskin." The bonny lasses made their adieus more modestly, and more than one, it was said, would have given her best brooch to be certain that it was upon her that his eye last rested as he turned towards the road. Robin Oig had just given the preliminary "hoo-hoo" to urge forward the loiterers of the drove, when there was a cry behind him. "Stay, Robin, bide a blink. Here is Janet of Tomahurrick, old Janet, your father's sister." "Plague on her for an owl Highland witch and spaewife," said a farmer from the Carse of Stirling. "She'll cast some of her cantrips on the cattle." "She canna do that," said another sapient of the same profession. "Robin Oig is no the lad to leave any of them without tying Sid Mungo's knot on their tails, and that will put to her speed the best witch that ever flew over Dimiet upon a broomstick." It may not be indifferent to the reader to know that the Highland cattle are peculiarly liable to be taken or infected by spells and witchcraft, which judicious people guard against by knitting knots of peculiar complexity on the tuft of hair which terminates the animal's tail. But the old woman who was the object of the farmer's suspicion seemed only busied about the drover, without paying any attention to the drove. Robin, on the contrary, appeared rather impatient of her presence. "What owl world fancy," he said, "has brought you so early from the Ingleside this morning, mum? I am sure I bid you good evening, and had your God speed last night." "And left me more siller than the useless old woman will use till you come back again, bird of my bosom," said the Sibyl. "But it is little I would care for the food that nourishes me, or the fire that warms me, or for God's blessed sun itself, if aught but weal should happen to the grandson of my father. So let me walk the diesel round you, that you may go safe out into the far foreign land and come safe home." Robin Oig stopped, half embarrassed, half laughing, and signing to those around that he only complied with the old woman to soothe her humour. In the meantime, she traced around him with wavering steps the propitiation which some have thought has been derived from the Druidical mythology. It consists, as is well known, in the person who makes the diesel walking 3 times round the person who is the object of the ceremony, taking care to move according to the course of the sun. At once, however, she stopped short and exclaimed in a voice of alarm and horror, "Grandson of my father, there is blood on your hand!" "Hush, for God's sake, aunt!" said Robin Oig. "You will bring more trouble on yourself with this Tashatara, second sight, than you will be able to get out of for many a day." The old woman only repeated, with a ghastly look, "There is blood on your hand, and it is English blood. The blood of the Gael is richer and redder. Let us see, let us—" Ere Robin Oig could prevent her, which indeed could only have been by positive violence, so hasty and peremptory were her proceedings, she had drawn from his side the dirk which lodged in the folds of his plaid, and held it up, exclaiming, although the weapon gleamed clear and bright in the sun, "Blood, blood, Saxon blood again! Robin Oig McCormick, go not this day to England." "Tut, tut," answered Robin Oig, "that will never do neither. It would be next thing to run in the country. For shame, mum, give me the dirk. You can't tell by the colour the difference betwixt the blood of a black bullock and a white one, and you speak of knowing Saxon from Gaelic blood. All men have their blood from Adam, mum. Give me my skein do, and let me go on my road. I should have been halfway to Stirling Brig by this time. Give me my dirk and let me go." "Never will I give it to you," said the old woman. "Never will I quit my hold upon your plaid unless you promise me not to wear that unhappy weapon." The women around him urged him also, saying few of his aunt's words fell to the ground, and as the lowland farmers continued to look moodily on the scene, Robin Oig determined to close it at any sacrifice. "Well then," said the young drover, giving the scabbard of the weapon to Hugh Morrison, "you lowlanders care nothing for these freats. Keep my dirk for me. I cannot give it you because it was my father's, but your drove follows ours, and I am content it should be in your keeping, not in mine. Will this do, mum?" "It must," said the old woman. "That is, if the Lowlander is mad enough to carry the knife." The strong Westland man laughed aloud. "Ha ha, good wife," said he. "I am Hugh Morrison from Glenea, come of the manly Morrisons of Auld Lang Syne, that never took short weapon against a man in their lives. And neither needed they. They had their broadswords, and I have this bit supple," showing a formidable cudgel. "For dirking o'er the board, I leave that to John Highlandman. You needna snort, none of you Highlanders, and you in especial, Robin. I'll keep the bit knife, if you are feared of the old spaewife's tale, and give it back to you whenever you want it." Robin was not particularly pleased with some part of Hugh Morrison's speech, but he had learned in his travels more patience than belonged to his Highland constitution originally, and he accepted the service of the descendant of the manly Morrisons, without finding fault with the rather deprecating manner in which it was offered. "If he had not had his morning in his head, and been but a Dumfriesshire hog into the boot, he would have spoken more like a gentleman. But you cannot have more of a sow than a grumph. It's shame my father's knife should ever slash a haggis for the like of him." Thus saying, but saying it in Gaelic, Robin drove on his cattle, and waved farewell to all behind him. He was in the greater haste because he expected to join at Falkirk a comrade and brother in profession with whom he proposed to travel in company. Robin Oig's chosen friend was a young Englishman, Harry Wakefield by name, well known at every northern market, and in his way as much famed and honoured as our Highland driver of bullocks. He was nearly 6 feet high, gallantly formed to keep the rounds at Straithfield or maintain the ring at a wrestling match, and although he might have been overmatched perhaps among the regular professors of the fancy, yet as a yokel or rustic or a chance customer he was able to give a bellyful to any amateur of the pugilistic art. Doncaster races saw him in his glory, betting his guinea and generally successfully. Nor was there a main fought in Yorkshire, the feeders being persons of celebrity, at which he was not to be seen if business permitted. But though a sprack lad and fond of pleasures and its haunts, Harry Wakefield was steady, and not the cautious Robin Oig McCormick himself was more attentive to the main chance. His holidays were holidays indeed, but his days of work were dedicated to steady and persevering labour. In countenance and temper, Wakefield was the model of old England's merry yeomen, whose cloth-yard shafts in so many hundred battles asserted her superiority over the nations, and whose good sabres in our own time are her cheapest and most assured defence. His mirth was readily excited, for, strong in limb and constitution, and fortunate in circumstances, he was disposed to be pleased with everything about him, and such difficulties as he might occasionally encounter were, to a man of his energy, rather matter of amusement than serious annoyance. With all the merits of a sanguine temper, our young English drover was not without his defects. He was irascible, sometimes to the verge of being quarrelsome, and perhaps not the less inclined to bring his disputes to a pugilistic decision, because he found few antagonists able to stand up to him in the boxing ring. It is difficult to say how Harry Wakefield and Robin Oig first became intimates, but it is certain a close acquaintance had taken place betwixt them, although they had apparently few common subjects of conversation or of interest, so soon as their talk ceased to be of bullocks. Robin Oig, indeed, spoke the English language rather imperfectly upon any other topics but stots and kylos, and Harry Wakefield could never bring his broad Yorkshire tongue to utter a single word of Gaelic. It was in vain Robin spent a whole morning during a walk over Minch Moor in attempting to teach his companion to utter, with true precision, the shibboleth the who, which is the Gaelic for a calf. From Tarquhar to Murder Cairn, the hill rung with the discordant attempts of the Saxon upon the unmanageable monosyllable, and the heartfelt laugh which followed every failure. They had, however, better modes of awakening the echoes, for Wakefield could sing many a ditty to the praise of Moll, Susan, and Cicely, and Robin Oig had a particular gift at whistling interminable pibrocks through all their involutions, and what was more agreeable to his companion's southern ear, knew many of the northern airs, both lively and pathetic, to which Wakefield learned to pipe a bass. Thus, though Robin Oig could have hardly comprehended his companion's stories about horse racing and cockfighting or fox hunting, and although his own legends of clan fights and crias, varied with talk of Highland goblins and fairy folk, would have been caviar to his companion, they contrived nevertheless to find a degree of pleasure in each other's company, which had for 3 years back induced them to join company and travel together, when the direction of their journey permitted. Each, indeed, found his advantage in this companionship, for where could the Englishman have found a guide through the western Highlands like Robin Oig McCombich? And when they were on what Harry called the right side of the border, his patronage, which was extensive, and his purse, which was heavy, were at all times at the service of his Highland friend. And on many occasions his liberality did him genuine yeoman's service. End of section 1.